afternoon, everybody. So, very briefly, who's this voice that you are listening to right now? My name is Stuart Powell, and for those of you who I haven't met or come across before, very briefly, I've spent my entire career facilitating, mentoring, coaching, and advising organizations and leaders in businesses, both here in the UK and globally overseas as well. And Elizabeth, my wife, and I set the organization up to help other businesses and their leaders achieve beyond what they believe is possible. And we spend our time working with people like you, helping develop leaders, teams, and cultures to have even greater impact. So hopefully, with what we've got lined up for you this afternoon, there's going to be something in this webinar for every single one of you that's going to be that's listening right now. So very briefly, what are we going to be covering? I'll give you a quick overview of the objectives which we're doing now, a definition to psychological safety, a little bit of background to where it's come from. We'll then just briefly explore why we need to behave differently in the business world of today. We'll explore what is psychological safety and a little bit about its background, and we're going to have some opportunities for some interactive questions. We'll then move on to give you some tips to help you develop this thing called psychological safety for you, your team, and your organization. And last but not least, we'll round off with an interactive Q&A session. Okay, what are our objectives? First and foremost, to give you an understanding of why psychological safety matters in the rapidly changing business world of today. To help you consider what aspects of low psychological safety can impact on your ability to deliver value to your organization, whether that's you in your personal role, your team, or if your role happens to span elsewhere into the business. Let's look at ways to help you deliver more value. Let's understand also how our principles of psychological safety can create foundations for your own personal growth and development. And last but not least, to provide an opportunity to start the process of building something called a learning zone for you and your teams. So let's dive in and find out a little bit more. So, psychological safety. What is it? Well, on the one hand, we could look at it as being a clear set of ideas about how to create the right circumstances to succeed through various facets of culture and structure. Let's look at it from another perspective and think about it as being this sense of cultivating a culture free from fear and ego, a place where people can speak up, make mistakes, question things, and raise concerns without any sense of humiliation or retribution. Now, the challenge is we're dealing with a whole new set of expectations from a variety of different stakeholders, be they customers, employees, or investors. And that creates confusion, which is where we need clarity. We need to understand ways to navigate our way through that and to emerge through these turbulent times to create the right circumstances to help our people achieve, whether that's us, our teams, or across our wider organization. So some of you may have come across this little known company called Google. And Google has had a pretty influential impact on, I'm going to suggest, most of our lives. And Google published a study back in 2015, for those of you who are interested. It's called Project Aristotle. And the research was trying to understand what was underpinning their highest performing teams across the organization. And what they found was that the single most important factor in those high performing teams was this thing called psychological safety. The research reported that the capabilities of the individual team members mattered a little bit less for team performance than whole group processes, i.e., how team members shared information and collaborated together. So in particular, when individual members attached a low interpersonal risk to voicing their ideas or making mistakes, they were more likely to share insights, ideas, or challenge the status quo. So what did this result in? Well, the groups were able to access and integrate a greater diversity of thought to help drive innovation and to improve judgment and decision making. Employees have been found in psychologically safe teams to be less likely to want to leave Google. They brought in more revenue and were rated as effective as twice as often by their executives. So why does this matter? Well, the pace and power of the employer-employee relationship has never been in greater flux. Psychological safety involves contexts in which we perceive that we will not be penalized nor negatively judged for mistakes or failures or for challenging the status quo. And if we think about this, if we can't take risks or share ideas for fear of reprisal, individuals and organizations will not grow. So today's changing environment, I think for many of us, we're experiencing ever greater degrees of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We know that here in our industry, technology is increasing the pace of change. Evolving shopper expectations and the ability of new players to respond in new ways makes it more competitive than ever. Data is making decision-making even more complex, and changing business models mean more collaboration and new or different ways of working are required. So we think about ourselves, if this is our new normal, then we've got some decisions to begin to make. In this volatile, uncertain, complex, and business environment, past methods and ways of doing things are unlikely to solve new problems. Whether we have those issues today or they're coming down the line, we only know there's going to be more things for us to figure out. Eliciting and integrating a diversity of thought is known to be essential for challenging established practices and for breakthrough innovation. So embracing these challenges and the new opportunities that this environment presents is ever more important in this changing environment. We and our organizations have to learn. The organization has to learn. The culture surrounding that has to support the learning process. So with the rapidly changing environment that many of us are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, there is frequently little or no opportunity for reflection before important decisions need to be made. And the challenge of leadership is made more acute by the modern day mantra of doing more with less. Oh, and by the way, can you do it quicker? Which means that outcomes need to be delivered with ever fewer resources and show a much faster return than would have been the case in the relatively recent past. So surviving and thriving in this environment demands a different mindset and some new attributes in today's leaders. So let's just unpick this ever so slightly, and we think about whether this is you or somebody that you may recognize in your organization. We explore these different leadership styles for a brief moment. If you or someone you know is a volatile leader, your changing and erratic behavior will drive good people away. If you are an uncertain leader or you work with an uncertain leader, changing directions frustrates people and leads them to question capabilities. If you're a complex leader, or again, know one or work with one, no one will ever get to know all your expectations, and there's a danger of becoming unapproachable and difficult to know at anything other than a superficial level. And if you are or you see others leading with ambiguity, a lack of clarity in what is expected will disengage other people. So high levels of psychological safety support the diversity of thought to break down old, outdated routines. and enable revolutionary changes rather than just mere evolutionary changes. Emergent strategies are being adopted, but for these to be successful, we have to prepare ourselves, our teams, and our organizations to be able to feel able to deliver this change. So we've spent some time conducting our own research into psychological safety, and I'm about to share with you 5 core principles which underpin our model of psychological safety to give you a framework with which to begin to explore things you can do to help nudge the needle on the perception and the experience of psychological safety in your teams, with your colleagues around you, and perhaps even in your wider organization. So very briefly, number 1, this thing called pro-social climate. And what this is talking about are the expectations from people in your team or in your organization of the role of leadership. And actually, what is the organization's overriding attitude to people? Fundamentally, does the organization give a sense that we actually care? Number 2, our climate for organizational learning. What do we mean by this? It's the nature, the culture, the practice in which we and our organization either facilitates or hinders organizational learning. What is our attitude to this thing, in inverted commas, called failure? How do we approach learning? What structures, what systems, what methods, what forums, what ways of engaging people and promoting learning do we proactively put out there? Number 3, systems and structures, the things that sit behind our organization. The degree to which these things support the people in their roles and foster or not a sense of engagement with work and the work environment. How is our team, our business unit, our organization, how is it structured? Do we have the support in place and the systems in place to facilitate and enable collaboration? Have these processes been put in place from a perspective of user experience? And to what degree can we influence that ourselves? Number 4, penultimate one, team working climate. The degree to which people work together effectively and support and trust each other. What's it like being a member of our team? To what degree do we support one another? Do we encourage the diversity of debate? To what extent do we inquire and explore thoughts, ideas, and perspectives? To what extent do we engage with the character who loves to, quote unquote, sort of derail a conversation, but not from a negative place, but because they've actually got a really out there idea, something that could radically change what we do and how we do it. But because it's on the feather edges of what might be considered as possible or feasible, or perhaps they've got a bit of a track record for coming up with some weird and wonderful and wacky ideas, to what extent do we support them? Do we encourage them? Do we delve into their mindset, their ideas from a place of curiosity? If there was a theme that underpinned our ability to work together as a team, to what degree, how curious are we about each other and where each other is coming from? Okay, and last but not least, this thing called a historical climate. What do we mean by that? Think of it as the stories about who we are as an organization, where we have perhaps come from. Are we the result of a series of mergers and acquisitions? Have we been around forever? Are we a small family-run business? Are we an international global organization? How do we describe ourselves from a place of identity? How do we describe who we are? And the type of team, the type of culture, the type of organization that we want to become. and working in lots of different businesses, as I mentioned earlier, here in the UK and globally too, what's really interesting is to listen. Listen to the way people describe their identity as an organization. And if you're curious about this, listen to the language that somebody is using to describe who they are and where they've come from. Are they talking about the organization of the past? Or are they talking about the team, the culture, and the organization that they want to become or need to become in the future? Because there's a fabulous principle at play here, which is that language creates reality. Are we inadvertently reinforcing an identity of our past, or are we looking to create with intent the identity that is required for the future? So 5 principles, let's just dive into these a little bit more deeply. First of all, pro-social climate, how leadership behaviors are critical to high levels of psychological safety. We know, and there's loads of research out there, that leaders have a powerful effect on the perception of psychological safety. Researchers have shown that team members are particularly aware of the behavior of the leader, and we've all probably engaged leaders at some point before. Tyler and Lynn did a lot of research back in '92. Leaders' responses to events and behaviors influence, in a way that's either beneficial or detrimental to the group, other members' perceptions of what is appropriate and safe behavior. So leaders, and we're all leaders in our own right, we are therefore responsible for creating environments for learning by acting in ways that promote psychological safety. So what's out? Okay, out, autocratic behavior, inaccessibility, or a failure to acknowledge vulnerability. What's also out is being selected for technical expertise only. What do we need to look to create? What do we want more of? It's about seeking input, inviting feedback and ideas from others, and creating an interpersonal climate between people in which others are willing to speak up with both ideas and concerns. So with pro-social climate, leadership behaviors that is from all of us, are critical for fostering psychological safety. A single instance of a team leader critiquing, talking over, or otherwise dismissing a concern raised by a junior team member can damage perceptions of psychological safety for the whole team. This is why perceptions of psychological safety can vary markedly, both across departments, work groups, or across, of course, entire organizations, because of the role individual leadership behaviors play with this. Let's just explore the climate for organizational learning a little bit further. So we know this is about the importance of the pursuit and application of learning, and it's expressed in organizational and values, and it permeates all aspects of organizational life. Climates for organizational learning are impacted when people do not share ideas or contribute because of their perceived risk of doing so. Therefore, organizations expand or contract depending upon how employees can feel comfortable in contributing and taking risks. Now, what we do know is where there are high levels of psychological safety, the organization has the ability to develop and grow and develops naturally as conversations aid both individual and team understanding. It's also how silos are broken down and people are willing to share knowledge to help other teams, because it's less about what's just in it for me and it's more about what's in it for everybody else. Systems and structures. Okay, so we know we need to develop clearly defined goals, roles, and execution plans with our teams. Clarity helps to build psychological safety. Where goals are developed and mean something to your team, you're building enthusiasm and motivation to achieve. Take that further, roles may need flexibility to address the needs of a business adaptability. But don't take this as not having role boundaries, because that can be quite ambiguous for employees. But empower the team to make decisions because they're ready to. And this is a fundamental principle underpinning psychological safety. We need to build our teams so they know how to use tools and techniques because we've developed the right environment for autonomy and created a team culture to support this. There are some things, of course, that we cannot directly change or influence with systems the business is using or the way the business is perhaps structured from further up within the organization. But what role can we play to develop greater clarity around goals, roles, and execution plans? Okay, team working climate. We know that building trust in the team enables higher levels of interpersonal risk-taking, and it does lead to open communication and better collaboration. However, because psychological safety is a group-level phenomenon, what matters is not only the behaviors of leaders, but also the behaviors of all group members. Yes, leaders must pay attention to the responses of others as well as their own responses, but when the team are aligned, it enables them to work with ground rules, create ways of working and expectations that build team communication and responsiveness with higher consistency. And when you can ignite their enthusiasm, you're motivating them to learn by leading themselves. We can shape work according to the expectations are set. Back to the point made before, how clear are those expectations? When we're nurturing the growth of others, we're being more transparent about their successes and also their failures, but in a way that makes them want to try new things, because we can support them, and here's the key, without blame. So by understanding their psychological needs, you can support them and help them deal with confidence and competence issues because they can be discussed openly and transparency. Now, yes, leaders need empathy to situationally judge what is happening so that we can respond appropriately. And in a team working situation, this could be something like calling out inappropriate behavior, sharing examples of where you have taken risks, and building connections in the team and praising others for work that has been well done. Okay, last but not least, the historical climate. The culture you once had may not be the culture for the future. So let's be mindful as leaders in our organization, whether we have the formal title of leader or not. Just be mindful that stories from old and legacy systems will need to constantly be reviewed, challenged, with expectations from the past being recognized as not necessarily being the expectations of the future. With historical climate, old command and control cultures don't support psychological safety. So we need to make sure we are building a coaching and transformational leadership style to create the type of culture you need, not just for now, but for the future. And let's not forget, as we see more millennials joining the workforce, their expectations around personal safety has also seen an increase in developing working practices to support this concept of well-being in the workplace. So from the questions that you might be asking, the discussions that you're hearing, and the feedback channels that you are part of, what are you hearing? And what is it that you might be able to change? Let's just pause for a moment and reflect on an aspect of psychological safety. Let's put ourselves in the place of being in a team meeting, which I'm sure we've all done at some point. How many of you have held back from asking a question because you assumed the answer would already be known by everybody else, or that the question would sound so obvious that you'd look a bit stupid. So we're just going to open a poll now. How many of you have held back at some point in your career from asking a question because you assumed the answer would already be known by everybody else, or the question would sound so obvious that, answering it might look a bit stupid? Yes or no? %97 of us said yes, and thank you for joining my club at some point, because I think we've all had a very common experience here. Let's just briefly explore what might be holding us back. And we could spend a whole day just exploring and unpicking this question. What might some of those reasons be? Well, we might feel ignorant, we didn't know the answer. We assume others' knowledge is greater than ours, or perhaps more important. Maybe we just don't feel safe enough to ask the question for fear of being mocked. But what if no one else had even ever thought of that question? What could our role be in asking that question? What could we be doing to open up conversation? What can we and others learn from the experience of sharing the perspective that we might have? And by asking, might we have actually ended up preventing a mishap or a bigger issue to be dealt with in the not too distant future? There's an amazing book called The Fearless Organization by a lady called Amy Edmondson. And she has done some fabulous work around the concept of creating psychologically safe environments. And the work we've done really stands on the shoulders of a lot of what Amy has done. And very briefly, you'll see here in front of you a little chart. And the chart has got a couple of axes. The degree of psychological safety and the degree of motivation and accountability. And there's 4 zones that we can be exploring that we might find ourselves in, whether it's ourselves or it might be part of the wider team. Where might we find ourselves in terms of having a lack of psychological safety? So motivation and psychological safety go hand in hand. Without motivation, but having high psychological safety, people can enter into a zone of complacency. And, well, that might not fit how our organization needs to work in these times. Comfort zones have to be challenged to get results. People have to show the value they can offer their organization. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't rest and downtime to recharge our batteries. We're all human and we all need to do that. That should be happening alongside other wellness and well-being programs that are hopefully on offer in our organization. The other issue, though, is having low psychological safety and low motivation. Because if people don't care, there becomes a level of apathy. Oh, it's the way things are done around here. People are bored and not stimulated, and well, and we've all seen it, talent ends up leaving. This is where old command and control style cultures were like. Psychological safety wasn't a feature of these cultures. In fact, some cultures where we had examples of bullying, discrimination, and victimization were part of the historical climate and accepted as such. You can probably all think about examples in wider society where the way things have been done before in the past have created an environment of behavior that when we look at it today, we're questioning the absolute validity and the rightness of those behaviors. Now, the anxiety zone is dangerous. Okay, it's a busy place for people, but psychological safety is low. And there's a question here about how people are treated and valued as people, not as commodities. And where deadlines, objectives are unfeasible, we know this leads to stress and even shown to lead to chronic illness. However, let's explore the learning zone, which is where motivation and psychological safety levels are high. And in our ever-changing environment, high performance occurs when people are actively learning as they go. So I'm just really curious. I'm going to just throw up 5 factors of psychological safety that might give you the most concern. I'm just going to open up a quick poll here. Okay. So we're going to invite you to just give your thoughts and inputs on which one of these psychological safety factors gives you the most concern. Is it not having anyone to discuss challenges and opportunities with? Is it perhaps not having the structures and processes in place to support productivity or creativity? Is it the fact that the workplace, your environment, isn't investing in employee well-being? Is it perhaps feeling that people are afraid to share their views? Or last but not least, is it because you see a lack of collaboration across the business? So I'm just going to open the poll up now and invite you all to identify which of these factors gives you the most concern. Okay, now in last place, we've got answer C, the workplace not investing in employee well-being. So that's great. It sounds like either those things are in place or perhaps some of these other factors are a little bit more important. Next, we've got option B, structures and processes not supporting productivity and creativity, closely followed by option A, not having anyone to discuss challenges and opportunities with. And what we do know about the importance of our network is this is critical to playing a key and integral role in our ability to be resilient, and resilience and psychological safety very much go hand in hand. Now, option D, which got 25% of the votes, a sense of feeling that people are afraid to share their views. That's 1 in 4 of us think that people in our teams or in our organizations are afraid to share their views. And if we just pause for a moment to think about the impact of that, 25% of our organization, the talent that we are employing and looking to keep engaged, 1 in 4 are afraid to share their views. And then last but not least, in first place is a lack of collaboration across the business, and there's a variety of factors that of course will be influencing that. However, we do know that psychological safety will underpin to some extent our ability to improve our sense of progress in all of these areas. Okay, let's explore some quick tips then for all of us. Number 1, some communication tips. Ask for solutions. Positive outcome typically depends on others' input and buy-in. What would fix this? What would make it even better? Ask directly, what do you think needs to happen here? Or what would be your ideal scenario? How can I support you? Or last but not least, don't lead others to your solutions by asking leading questions. Give others space to think and create their own answers, maybe even their own questions to the challenge that has been set. So let's not forget, communication always has a context. Effective communication can encourage, support, challenge, and resolve local challenges and frustrations. Furthermore, communication is known to be able to win hearts and minds. What role are we playing to help others through our own communication style? Some tips for us as a team. Ask the team to create their own ground rules if they haven't done this already. Let them describe what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior. Allow them to create a series of commitments to each other. Allow these to be discussed at the end of team meetings to check in with each other if they have been upheld. Encourage open debate, but don't allow voices to be raised. Healthy conflict is fine. We know we need it, but there's a fine line between assertion and aggression. Don't put team members on the spot if they're not prepared. Why? Because it reduces trust. Give those who need reflection time that space to consider and gather their thoughts. Appreciate how things are expressed, the body language of the other person and what might be left out. These are all elements we can use to increase our understanding. And use questioning, listening, and reframing to help build better mutual understanding and get more from a conversation. A couple of quick self-development tips. What can we do to help build a sense of greater psychological safety? Choose how you will be in the moment. This will impact your decisions and outcomes, as well as impacting those with whom you're communicating and collaborating. Sometimes easier said than done, but it all starts with a sense of self-awareness. And recognize that our actions matter. The things we do are the sincerest demonstration of what we value and believe. Respect is ultimately forged or broken as a result of what people do. And if you're looking for a way to back them, the same applies. Actions count more than words. Real learning happens when we regularly embrace challenges. You may have heard this quote before, but feel the fear and do it anyway. When we treat people fairly, especially as a manager of others, we know that they are more likely to focus on navigating the challenges that are in front of them. And this is important because we need people to feel respected in order to allow trust to be deepened. And instead of focusing on gamesmanship and one-upmanship, let's focus on working towards both individual and collective group goals. So some quick next steps before we open up for some questions and answers. What can we do? What one thing can you say as a result of today to increase the sense of psychological safety for your team? Number two, what one idea could you submit to your manager or recommend as an improvement in psychological safety between the two of you? Number three, what can you do to strive for higher levels of psychological safety across all 5 principles? When you have a moment, maybe write these down in the style of a conversation that you might have with somebody. Create a beginning, the problem, a statement of action to take. Describe the impact of what is happening. And finally, what roles will play a part in making these things work, delivering the goal and objective. This can be a great team exercise as well. Okay, in summary, we've explored 5 factors that can increase team or personal performance in the workplace. What can we do to influence the climate, the set of expectations that leaders have, others have, about how leadership feels towards the people within the organization? Our climate for organizational learning. How do we create a greater sense and opportunity for those in our organizations to learn together? How clear are our systems and our structures? What guidance might we need to put in place to clarify things or put boundaries and set clearer expectations around what is being done? Our team working climate, not just my role in influencing how the team collaborates and works together, but what behaviors do we need to put in place to enable the team to be more supportive of one another? And finally, our historical climate. What stories, what ways of describing who we are and where we've come from are supporting our ability to create the identity that we need as a team, as an organization, as we move into the future. Okay, we're about to open up for some quick questions and answers. just to let you know that we have created a little psychological safety audit. And for those of you who are interested in seeing how this might be manifesting itself in your organization, if you're curious, check out the little link here that's in front of you, www.compasspartnership.com/IGD webinar, and it will give you an opportunity to answer 10 questions, and it will give you a short report that gives your perception of how you might think psychological safety is appearing in your organization, with some hints and tips and ideas of little things that you can do to improve that for you, your team, and the wider business.